Welcome to Halftime, a show dedicated to equipping and inspiring people to accomplish what God has prepared them for. I'm Doug Piper, and I'm a Halftime alumni, and I want to thank you so much for joining us. Halftime is focused on helping you create more meaning, joy, and impact in your life. So if you're feeling a bit that way, or maybe you know someone that's in that season, you can find out more by going to halftime.org. That's HALFTIME.org. Now, this is our 39th live stream event, and we're looking forward to more this year. And we're also going to launch a new podcast in just a few weeks. And I want to thank everybody for taking time to be with us today. Now, a great way to continue this is to continue the conversation there in the chat. And we'd love to know especially where you're viewing this from. You can also ask questions in the Ask a Question link, which is at the bottom center of the screen. And those questions will be answered in the second half, actually, whether you're there live or not. You'll get a unique email link to find it where you'll get your answer. And also, it's helpful in the upper right-hand corner, there is a green follow button. Click on that and you won't get spam or anything. You'll just get a quick notification when we go live. Now, we also have an opportunity. If you'd like to refresh your halftime roadmap for 2021, we have just a few openings left, and just click on the button there in the bottom center, and you can contact Lloyd to find out more. Now, today we're discussing best practices when news disrupts your family. Now, the news can bring conflict and isolation to your family, or it can become an anvil on which their faith and values are shaped. Now, for many Halftime alumni, our families are our top priority in this next season, but yet our role is changing as our family evolves. One challenge we've heard reoccurring over the past few months is discerning just how to help our family process the news in a healthy, biblical way. Our families get news in very different ways. It's minute by minute, and it's often relentless. And often social media algorithms funnel us into divergent or contradictory news. This can lead to isolation, a loss of peace, confidence, and the Christian moorings that we really covet for our families. So in the next 45 minutes, Lloyd and I will open a conversation with Tomas Brunegård, and this might be able to bring you perspective, maybe a new posture, and a truth source that is both winsome but grounded in God's unchanging wisdom. Now, I want to bring everybody up on screen. There we go. We got Lloyd. We got Tomas. There we go. Excellent. Gentlemen.
Good morning, Doug.
Good morning. How are you? And good afternoon, Tomas.
Good afternoon.
Tomas Brunegård joins us from Sweden. He was the CEO of the largest daily newspaper chain in Sweden when he came through the Halftime Institute. Building on the clarity he gained, he moved from CEO to chairman and then became the president of the World Association of Newspapers. Now, this is the premier association of the world's top news producers. His passion is to focus this global group of media giants on freedom of speech. Now, after a lifetime in the news, Tomas will bring to you his perspective and simple best practices from which you can innovate for your family. Now, Lloyd Reeb is a successful real estate developer, author of 3 books, and the founding partner of Halftime Institute. Now, welcome, everybody. I hope everyone is well. Now, Lloyd, why not just let our kids, siblings, sons, daughter-in-laws think whatever they want to think about today's news and maybe steer away from the conversations to happier, less confrontational topics?
Yeah, well, that would certainly feel safer, right, Doug? But it makes, each of us step back and ask the question, what am I trying to do in my family? What's my objective? What's my vision for my family? And I think it's a bigger risk to just step back and and let things ride out. And Tomas, I know you're going to bring a historic perspective to what that's done in Christian families in the past. But Doug, I loved one thing you said that I kind of jotted. The news can bring conflict and isolation to your family, or it can become an anvil on which their faith and values are shaped. This is a more rigorous journey with them that requires humility and stepping past our fears and being co-learners with them and deeply dividing between the unchanging truth of the Bible and the values that we know are in their best interest and our grandkids' best interest, and my little opinions about economic policy or something else, or powering up over something. And so how do you delineate between those strategies? And what we already know about each of our Halftime alumni, Doug, is that they want to invest in their family and beyond and bring blessing. And that's why over the last few months, particularly here in America, news has been a huge disruptor in families. And almost every coaching conversation I've had, it comes up. And so I know it's of interest to you, and it's an important topic. And so, Tomas, you and I have been on this journey together for 15 or more years. We've grown to love each other deeply. I remember you were in Indonesia or somewhere, and you flew the wrong way around the world to come to my 50th birthday party and to speak at it. And in fact, I flew on a Thursday to Sweden to be at your birthday party on a Friday and flew back on Sunday. And it's been a joy and a wonderful journey together. So take us into a little bit of your halftime journey first before we dive into this topic of the news.
Well, in short, came out of university, started as a management consultant at the management consultant company, came into Burger King in the early 90s because we wanted to bring Whoppers to Sweden. And from that, I took a giant leap. I was only 33 years old, got headhunted to the second largest daily newspaper, who wanted some new, fresh guys into the media industry in the early 90s. So with that started a new career, but I was not far away from media because I always wanted to be a journalist, but I had 2 bad grades in school. So, but I got in there, became CEO as a 33-year-old. And from that started a journey that was a lot of ups and downs at the beginning, but then it evolved into a success story. And we more than quadrupled the company until I went to Halftime. I actually met the pastor, Bill Hybels, once, and he gave me the book by Bob Buford. And that hit a gong in my life that, how do I turn myself from, doing what I do, but it's not the purpose, it's not the end of my life. And I started to look for next season. And that's when I found you, Lloyd.
And this wasn't just a journey you went on yourself, because I remember asking you, tell me about what Tina's dreams are. And I think you stumbled around a little bit to figure out what that was. But that's been a rich, rich part of this last 15 years, hasn't it? Yeah.
Well, you asked me, what does your wife say? And, I thought it was a little bit like going off in a new career path, doing something differently. When I started to think about doing a shift when I turned 50. But I remember walking down the stairs to my wife after having had the call with you, and she got just overthrown by me asking her about, the next stage in life. And from that day and on, it became a journey for both of us, and for her became a flourishing work in our church with homeless.
So, Tomas, one of the interesting things, because you're outspoken about your Christian faith in Western Europe, is your life has been thrust into the news. In some ways, it's been a bigger disruptive thing in your family with 4 children. They've seen you in the paper. They've seen you on the equivalent of 60 Minutes in Europe. They've made a play about your life called the media house that God forgot, and in which they read excerpts from Halftime. I mean, that's about as how do you handle that at the family dinner table? And so take us a little bit into the history of why these family conversations are so important, and maybe a little bit about what that's been like for you in the journey where your name and face has been all over the news.
Well, first, I mean, if you come into an industry which is as conservative, which the media industry is, you could think the other way, that it's very liberal, but it's actually very conservative in its roots. And you start to change things, and you start to think that, well, hey, Google, Facebook, and there's a lot of new things coming at us. What do we do to change? This caused disturbance, this caused change. And if you're then at the same time an outspoken Christian, and you become a leader of the industry, which I did, you end up facing challenges because they will write about you. And or the journalists, they do their job and they write about you. So my kids got used to writing about, when I fired people, when we had to lay off people, about my bonus coming, about all sorts of things. So they got used to that from when they were very young. But of course, when I entered my halftime journey more profoundly and took a step out of the operational role, and the company got some difficulty or got in difficulties, and there were a lot of discussions on my role, and also continuing being Christian, going taking steps towards becoming more involved in church work, also going out to the mission fields like Papua New Guinea with Mission Aviation Fellowship, like we did. It created a divide that was not understandable to a lot of people, and that's when it occurred. The 60 Minutes, the play, and my kids, they were kind of used to it, but my life was on stage. To say that everything is okay, that didn't work, and that had taught me that you got to just, if you got to save the kids, or they're going to be close to you, you got to be very open about what's difficult and what are you struggling with.
Now, historically, I know you've been a student of history in the news, and particularly its impact on Europe over hundreds of years. Give us a 2 or 3 minute snapshot on why historically leaning into this conversation rather than leaning out is critical.
Well, now you hit the button. It's, I mean, the news and the freedom of speech and freedom of religion goes hand in hand. That's the same in the American Constitution and in the Constitution of the EU. This was very vital for the founding fathers of the EU after the totalitarian regimes in Europe. And Sweden, for example, has the longest tradition of freedom of speech since 1766. I mean, it's 10 years before the French Revolution. So it's grown into our genes of how to operate in democracy. And really the poison pill towards corruption is freedom of speech. And that's why it's so important when you try to nurture and develop democracy through the centuries. Freedom of speech is an extremely vital thing. And one problem we've had is that in Sweden, when this got a fight, when we built the welfare state and so on, took Sweden from one of the poorest country in Europe 150 years ago to becoming one of the wealthiest nations on earth. The Christians actually stepped out and was part of that change using the freedom of the speech. This was very vital. But then entering the 20th century, we kind of not lost the battle, but stepped out of it, started to look at society as something evil, something bad, don't get involved. And we are now suffering from being pretty remote. And the work is now to get back into a healthy conversation again on what's real Christianity, what's mere Christianity in a context, so to speak, if using C.S. Lewis.
All right. So, that's a deep topic. Gosh, you and I could spend a half hour, an hour just on that topic. And maybe someday we'll come back to that. But in the meantime, Doug, the poll is so important for us, isn't it? Each time we do these live streams to get perspective on what our fellow Halftime alumni are thinking. So take us into that.
It really is. And if those of you that haven't had a chance to answer it, it's very quick. Just vote on the answer that relates to you the most. And I'll read these just quickly while everybody takes a chance to answer them. So which sentence below best describes how your family relates to the news altogether? It's a big topic in our family, surrounded by open and healthy discussions as we help each other respond to the big issues we face in the world. Everyone is friendly when the news comes up, but we end up with little clarity or benefit to take away. Often the conversation is dominated by just a few people with strong opinions, and it robs our family of joy and intimacy. It's not something we focus on at all. We just passing comments, and then we intentionally move on to more fun topics. It is off limits. We try to avoid talking about the news entirely. So we'll look at the most popular answer, and it's pretty distinct, Lloyd and Tomas. By far, 57, well, it's varying, 56, 57% say it's a big topic at our family, surrounded by open and healthy discussion as we help each other respond to the big issues we face in the world. Second to that is it's not something we focus on, just passing comments, and then we intentionally move on to more fun topics. Those two dominate, and that is the majority of our response to this poll right now, and they're clearly in those two areas primarily.
Wow, that's helpful. Now, it's interesting because then those diverge. You know, what you do about the news, if you're in one of those groups, right, Doug, is different than what you do in the other. I would love if we had a big open conversation of everybody that's in the 68% or whatever that have this robust conversation. Wouldn't we learn so much from each other around that? And we're going to try to tease out what from Tomas, what he's been learning in this journey. And then for those who really try to just downplay it a little bit, maybe these same steps will help you create some early pathways. Here's what I find interesting. I find that it takes work for me to delineate between what are the unchanging values rooted in Jesus' teachings and what are my little opinions that have formed over time. And you certainly, that takes legwork. Secondly, like you and I were saying yesterday or the day before, Tomas, fear and pride. Gosh, fear and pride stand in our way. Fear that this conversation will the family will just lurch out into some unknown waters. And then pride that makes me kind of power up and want to say, hey, I'm 59. I've been around a long time. I've coached a lot of smart people, that kind of ridiculous stuff. And it's probably even harder for you since you know the news. And so here's what I saw, Tomas, is in my life that I was tempted in three directions. One, to become like a dogmatic preacher type, where I'm entrenched and I get to be a grumpy old man and my grandkids no longer listen to me. Or number two, I become this wishy-washy peacemaker that really never, ever takes a stand. They don't know what I think. Or because I like intellectual debate, it becomes like a fun game, almost like chess. Family conversations are no more rich than just a chess game when you put all the pieces back in the box and you close it up and you go to bed at night, and it doesn't lead the family somewhere. So take us into what you've been learning. This is the bulk of our conversation here, Tomas, is what should we be doing?
Well, I feel very humble for this on this topic, I think it takes humility overall on trying to understand what's going on in the world, and especially in the young world. And when you get close, so I have 4 children, and especially with my younger daughter, she's now 18. Has been I think I learned most from my conversations with her, because here you have she's switched on, she's bright, she's out there, she's engaged in issues that's going on in the society. So I think that when you approach this, you got to stay curious. It has become very important. It's to stay curious on what are she and her friends, what are they talking about, what are the issues for them, and to get close to that and kind of stay informed. Read what they do, see what they see. That's what I mean with curiosity a little bit. Get into their shoes. Biden said that actually yesterday at the inauguration. Get in the other's shoes. So that's one thing, and you got to do that with humility. On the other hand, you don't have to give. There is some sort of a true north. I don't. I think you call it wishy-washy. We don't have to become wishy-washy because I have a true north. I have my values rooted in the Bible. But when you say that, you got to be careful because a lot in the Bible is also contextual and something is internal. And Jesus gave us metaphors or
Parables.
parables, yes, to be able to translate that into various times. And we got to understand how does that work play into our time. Here I think that's where humility comes in, because to become dogmatic doesn't work, especially not at this day and age when you have such great generation barriers.
So let's go a little deeper than that. What does that actually look like sitting around the house? I mean, does it take leadership to bring these topics up? Did you ever have to go back and say, "Hey, I feel like this is so important in our family. I'm ready to listen and learn from you guys." Or what's the proactive steps that people, one of the things you mentioned in passing that was interesting is you never want to win these discussions, which I thought was an interesting way of framing it up.
And that's hard for me because I like winning discussions. I'm a little bit of a besserwisser. I love these question games, where you ask about historical stuff. So I love winning discussions. But I've learned that on these discussions, I cannot win. We have to learn from it together and enter these issues together. And I mean, just to give you an example on hard topics. So I ended up on the front page of the biggest tabloid, well, actually on the posters of the biggest tabloid, being one of the dark guys in Sweden being against all gay marriages, because I was on the board for our church and we don't have we don't have same-sex marriage. And my kids, especially my youngest daughter, really asked, "Dad, what do you think? How do you go about this? How can you believe this?" Because this was a topic that went around among her friends. And this is a typical thing where you have to be, if you live your life on stage, and I think we all as parents should live a little bit our lives on stage because our kids learn by example. You got to be able to take these discussions and resonate with them. Where do you come from? But don't become a curling parent, because still you got to say that this is the road, this is the roadmap I have. Are the guiding principles that I have. And that's sometimes hard, and especially when their friends, my kids' friends, are around the table as well.
Well, and think about that, Tomas. You're not trying to give them the answers as much as you are trying to point them to where they can find the answers. And if every time a tough question comes up, I just give a dogmatic answer, I think first of all, our grandkids, think about it. You and I, when we're 15 years from now, my oldest granddaughter is 2.5. They're going to be 17. They'll be driving. And if we get stuck in our ways without being able to delineate between our opinions and the foundational values that are unchanging in God's word, they won't be listening to us. They may not even be interested in hearing our perspective on things. And that's hard work, what you're talking about doing. How did that conversation go when you were on the tabloid front cover, for example? Take us just, if you can, without sharing something confidential about Esther, but
well, it's nothing to hide, because I was fairly challenged, and I mean, Sweden is a liberal country, and I think there are many questions that are difficult. I have to say that first. Even if I'm on the leadership of a church, I think there are many issues that I don't really know what to say. Or how to answer them. That's the first thing. But I think
that's back to that humility piece, right? That we don't know all the.
And I think that's fair to say. But still, I've been part of taking decisions, and in this case, this was a little bit of just painting me as a bad person from a public standpoint. So you have to remember that. But my daughter, 17 years, she has come back to this issue many times, because it's, if you Google me, you'll find this still. It doesn't go away. So even 5, 10 years later, it's an issue, and we have to. It comes back and it comes back, and we have to talk about it because it comes up and it goes. It comes up now and then with her friends, and she even had friends who have tried to paint our family in black because of these articles.
Yeah.
Where she has had to defend me.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I learned from Bob Buford was he would, in our private conversations, he would say, Lloyd, why would I want to allow our society to put me in some little bucket? Like if there's the left and right perspective on something, why wouldn't I just find the freedom to seek out what Jesus taught about this and have a grounding belief that ends up over here in this bucket, and another grounding belief that ends up in this bucket and in this bucket, and be really have life perspective is as holistic, really following Jesus' principles rather than getting stuck in some dogmatic corner where I have to defend all the things that are in that space. Now that your kids are, studied at the best schools around Sweden, and they're in their own careers, and the conversation is changing, right? And sometimes they've got, my son Carter is a PhD in environmental engineering. So when stuff comes up around the environment, I really do have to be a listener, right? I mean, I barely passed chemistry in undergrad, and this guy's got a PhD. So I think I should be a learner, right? So what's the difference now? This is we're going to wrap up here, but what's the difference now that these are really mature professionals?
Well, I mean, they are now mature. They're grown-ups, even if they have less years on their in their lives. They are grown-ups. They have learned so many new things that I need to just to get these AirPods to work. I have to call them. I mean, so that's one. It's a friendship, and we moved over from a parent-kid and then into friendship. But of course, where I think the fruit comes from this is that they still listen, they value, they interpret, they see the example, and I that's maybe where I see the positive fruits of having actually had these conversations around the dinner tables.
So okay, so let's sum it up, if you would, Tomas. How would you sum up your advice on this, and what are some of the specific next steps that you think are really the essential groundwork?
Stay open, be curious, read, study, see what they do, our kids. Know your true north. Understand the values that are eternal, that you will live and die by, and then do this in humility. I think that's the road forward.
Wow. That's great. Thank you. Doug, let's look at what are some of the questions now coming from our friends and fellow Halftime alumni.
Absolutely. We promise everybody that we will try and wrap up the main part of our presentation in 30 minutes. So we're at that point. If you need to go, we understand. We thank you for your time. If you can stay, I think you'll enjoy hearing the answers to the questions. And also note, if you need to go, but you want to ask a question, you don't have to be there live to get your question answered. You get a unique email and you can read it or view it later. So, Tomas, we will go to the questions. And by the way, you can vote up your questions. The most popular question that we have right now is, do you have a litmus test to assess the trustworthiness of a particular news source?
I wouldn't. Is that a question to me?
It is.
It is. Yeah. I would never trust one source. There are better and there are worse sources. I always mention The Economist. I think that's by far the best magazine produced on earth. It's a British one. But I would not trust one source. I would stay with a multiple of trustworthy sources, and by that get my worldview. And this where the internet has helped us, because today I read everything from American news sources, British, Europeans, over to the Asian, South Morning Post in China, or Al Jazeera, and then over maybe to Australia as well. And you get a pretty good perspective of what's going on.
So there's not one test so much as it is be sure to spread it out.
Yeah, because you will know what's going on having screening these things, and it's simply done in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, which is equivalent what the normal people read a newspaper every day in Sweden is 20 minutes.
20 minutes. That's not very long.
No, but still it's a long time if you compare it to a lot of other stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Ed. Ed says, our family generally has robust conversations, but the cancel culture mentality can come up. How do you get friends and family to engage in discussion even when we have different perspectives?
Wow. Well, this is not a problem because people are my family, they engaged if we are sitting around the table. There are individuals in even my family who rather, walk away than to take a discussion. So I think that you got to start with them. You can't start yourself. You got to realize what's on their mind and what's like burning issues up here, because every person has those, and start from there.
Yeah, so start with what they're interested in rather than something your own agenda. Right. And I think that comes back to understanding, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to change their opinion, or am I trying to help them be the very best follower of Jesus in the context of their world long after I'm gone? And that's a different thing.
Well, and building your family up, a loving family. You're not trying to tear it down by bringing up a topic. How do you draw them together, I think, is the key. Ed, what a great question. We just have one more. And so if you want to get your question in, now's the time. Our last question is, and this kind of goes back to the previous question, the first question, Tomas. How do you balance the time committed to staying informed and not getting sucked into news as a form of entertainment?
So I'm a heavy consumer on news, as you can tell. I'm actually learning a lot by following Rick Warren these days. He has a 28, 29 episodes preaching, where he has sermons on how do you survive the pandemic. And he comes back all the time that don't start your day with news, start it in the scriptures. And I have actually changed my pattern because of this. So I've started to go back. I read the Psalms right now, read them in the message, and by that getting a fresh view on them. And I start my day with that. And I used to start with, reading through the newspapers, and I've changed that. That I think gives a balance. That's what I'm saying.
I love that answer. What a stellar answer. And we've got one more question. This it's phrased a little difficult, so we may have to temper it a little bit. But Ken asks about your ability to trust the major networks like CNN or Fox or MSNBC. And you had said look at multiple sources to kind of assess it. So, I mean, so I think the question is there enough good information in the major networks that they can be trusted as one of your sources that you're balancing against each other?
I understand your question. It's heavily US biased. So that's okay. I get it. You in the US have the best and the worst of media. So it's because of polarization that you've been through over a longer period of time. It's very easy to say that's over the last 4 years. It's not. It's been going on for a longer period of time. And this is happening all around the globe, but you are kind of leading the show. I mean, there are most places on Earth you don't have good media. Only 20% of the population around Earth has some sort of healthy press freedom that we are talking about. So you have to have that in perspective. If you go to China, there is no press freedom. Well, but let's talk about the Western democracies and the US. So I think that you can balance a fragmented US media perspective. And I have to say that I gave over the presidency of the World Association of Newspapers to one of the Sulzbergers that owns the New York Times. So we have discussed this a lot. I think that by balancing your views, for example, looking at the BBC, which I think is a balanced news source, you can actually go outside to get a view on the US because everyone is following the US like we were. Sweden is like a 51st state of the US when it comes to the news. So there are plenty of sources to actually get into the portfolio of where do you look at, how do you get your views. But again, don't just stay with one. Don't just stay with CNN, which I tell my Swedish friends. Don't just look at CNN. Look at various news sources.
Keep it broad. But I wanted to go back. You made one comment I thought was really interesting. So
Doug,
while
if I
in the
could, sorry, just one more thing on that before. One other way, though, that strikes me, Tomas, is the direct interviews that you might not find on the major news, or like, for example, the clip that you sent me of Anderson Cooper interviewing the Senate chaplain Barry Black just the day after the riots in Washington, D.C. We watched that as a family and talked it through. And it was fascinating because it wasn't a major news item, but it was an interview. And you got to watch two human beings process something with the scripture being the foundation of it. And it was so powerful. And so I find that there are these little snippets you can find. For example, I remember when Bono met the pastor who wrote the Message translation of the Bible and went to his home out in British Columbia. We watched that as a family. And here's Bono coming in and sitting at his kitchen table and playing and singing with him. It was more powerful than any news that we've seen out there. And here's a person they respect as a music artist, and here's a person that they read who's translated the Bible into the Message paraphrase at the same table, sitting, talking and about the world and singing music together. It was so powerful. And so I think there's a work for us to do as leaders in our families to go find those nuggets. I mean, you had to go look for that, Tomas, that clip you sent me, and it was a blessing in our family. Sorry, Doug. I just was afraid I would lose that.
No, but I think this is. Can I just jump in that? So I gave this little piece of clip of a CNN interview to a friend who then writes chronicles on Sunday mornings in the second largest morning newspaper, and he wrote a whole article on this. And there's about 500,000 readers. So I mean, it's important to share these things, these little golden nuggets, as you say, Lloyd, and because they are there. A lot of journalists are doing a good job, and they are all over the place in every news source.
Well, Lloyd, your comment was so well made, because when you hear it from the politician or the source and you go direct and it's not being interpreted by the news, it has a whole different level of, I guess, trustworthiness. Well, the other thing, what I was going to say is I do get frustrated with our news, but Tomas, you put a real perspective on it. 80% of the world does not have any good news. We have some of the best in the Western world, which is just 20% of the population. So while we may get frustrated, we actually are better off news-wise than 80% of the rest of the world. That is truly humbling. Wow. All right, we have one more question. Ken had a great one there. Jim asks, do you feel free speech is as strong today as ever, or is it being compromised through social media giants with power to determine what is free and what is not?
This is a really hot topic. First, free speech is deteriorating. So the same map where I said 80-20, 20% has about the level of free speech as we have in our countries, 80% doesn't have, and that's decreasing by the minute. And then comes what happened the other week when Twitter shut down President Trump, which you might have any opinion on Trump, whether he should say what he does, or you should think that he shouldn't say that. But to shut him up, show the powers of these media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, that are not operating under the same rules as, for example, the legacy media has on what can you publish, what can you not publish, what should you publish, what should you not publish, and also have in some sort of decency, giving a fair debate a room. This is not going on with the new media platforms, and that's why I think it's wrong from a press freedom perspective to shut Trump up. And I know that every scholar in the air, not everyone, but those ones that I read, they think the same way, even if he's saying things that you don't like.
Jim, I think you asked a very powerful question. And Tomas, that was very insightful. Thank you so much for that. We actually have got one more question in there. Are you game to at least answer one more question, Tomas?
Sure.
Great.
Go on. Throw it at me.
All right, throw it at you. Okay. Amy asks, how can the media encourage civil discourse, the freedom to disagree and discuss? How can we support that as an individual?
This is also a big topic, and I don't have all the answers to that. Let me start in one end. The media business as such, the business model of the television news and print news and all of news media is broken because it was all funded by advertising, and that's gone. More than half of, I think, newspaper circulation today is owned by venture capitalists today in the US, for example. This means that there is a big debate within the media community, and especially among journalists, on who and what are we serving and what have we, because many starts with a high moral ambition in the work they're getting into. It's not like any job for most of them. They want to tell the truth. They want to find the truth. They want to do the right thing. That's at least those journalists that I've worked with. But then they end up into this, that there is a media, an economic situation that you got to fulfill, and you have also owners that has sometimes an agenda. I think it's obvious that Rupert Murdoch has had agendas with his media companies. But that model is gone a little bit. So now there is this existential discussion. How can we survive, and how can we get back to telling news and give news and views and information to our readers or viewers or listeners or clickers? And this healthy debate is going to reshape media. It is. And I think by getting in there and actually helping to fund that, and paying for some of these news sources, get onto a subscription, be part of crowdsourcing on new media outlets. I think that's one way of getting in and engaging that, because if you have a problem in the US that very local media outlets or companies or newspapers, they're gone. Many of them are gone forever. And this is happening in all over Western Europe right now because the economic model is broken. And a little bit, we have to take a consumer responsibility on this one.
My dad used to always say, vote with your wallet.
So, Doug, if that's the only, if that's our last question, I'd like to wrap up with one other thought.
We have one more.
Okay.
If Tomas is willing to go there.
Sitting around in the snow over there in Sweden. What is there to do on a Thursday afternoon?
All right.
All right. Carol asked the next question. 1 second. Let me We had a click problem. Here we go. It is said that where you sit is where you stand. Each source is a totally different story from another. This creates strong feelings. How do you deal with this when your friends just aren't open?
Can you read that again? Because you were interrupted. I couldn't hear the whole thing.
Okay, I apologize. It is said where you sit is where you stand. Each source is telling a totally different story from another. And this creates strong feelings. So how do you deal with them? And I think we're talking about the difference between Al Jazeera and CNN and MSNBC. They have a different priority when they report the news. But many of us, as you pointed out, may only watch one particular news source. So how do we discuss that with productive discussions and minimizing conflict?
Again, this has a lot to do with attitude. I mean, do you come in with a very defined attitude that this is the way it is, or this is the way it is? Then we're never going to meet each other, and we're probably not going to ever. I mean, how are we ever going to fit into heaven if everyone is? Need to have different rooms. So I think that being open to various worldviews is the first thing, and then you just got to realize that in a city like my city, Gothenburg, about 1 million people live here. A third of the population come from different countries, from all over the world. We have taken a lot of refugees. In 2015, we took a lot. So it means that their news sources is not the Gothenburg Post. It's Al Jazeera or it's something else. And it comes in, we have the dish satellites. So they have a worldview that it's sourced by another news flow than I have as a Swede for generations. And this is what, so when we meet, for example, in church, when many people now come to church and it has revitalized the church, we got to be very open with our mindset on where these people come from, what's their worldview, and have a healthy conversation in that one. And I think that goes with friends as well. Even if they have totally different political ambition, worldviews, and they feed that on Facebook, I mean, when they are in the bubble, and I'm in another one, so I get in my bubble. We got to be able to step out of that and meet and have dinner conversations that doesn't end up in fights.
And Tomas, I think you've had 300 or 400, maybe 500 immigrants, right, that have come from the Middle East up across Europe and are now engaged and been reached in some way with your church through compassion. Isn't that?
Yeah, just a group from Iran and Afghanistan. They were at one time, I don't know how many they are now, they were 600. So we had 600 Farsi speaking people, and they have, of course, a totally different worldview than mine. And because, as I said, we opened up our borders in 2015 when Europe was flooded with immigrants from Syria, Middle East, Northern Africa, our church exploded with people from all over this part. And this, so we have actually been forced to and learned to take a very open attitude on many things where we were locked into other positions in the past.
Lloyd, does this come back to your comment on staying curious? Yeah, or actually, I got that from Tomas. Yeah, that's the key, I think. And it may be that, like the books you read, that do your children and grandchildren see you, or your siblings see you diving into stuff that surprises them, that they think that helps them realize you're on a quest to really understand, not necessarily agree with everything, but understand where someone's coming from and where their perspective may be coming from. And we have one child that, like I said, is an environmental PhD in environmental science. I have a daughter that's a missionary in France, and France has a whole different source of media that's coming their way, and their perspective on America is largely skewed one direction. I have a daughter that works in talent acquisition at Water Missions International, and they bring clean water, sanitation, and hygiene to children that are dying. 17,000 children die every day of preventable causes, largely water-driven. There's three very different issues, and my son-in-law works in the Senate subcommittee on marine health and wellness, and his office is directly above Kamala Harris's in the Senate building. So I'll tell you, our conversations have a very different perspective, and I know very little about a lot of those topics. So isn't that a joy that we could still be firm and confident and grounded, not wishy-washy and not dogmatic, and not just a trivial intellectual debate where you put all the pieces in the box and go back to bed and wake up the next day, but to really be on a journey to love and follow Jesus in a world that's changing faster than we can imagine, but where the truth of God never changes. I have a 317-year-old Bible sitting on my credenza. It doesn't have a single rip in it. It's in the French language where my family came from. And sometime 317 years ago, there was a French person who carried that Bible, who rode a horse and probably carried a sword. And the truth in that book was the same then as it is today. And I don't ride horses and I don't carry a sword, but my perspective is shaped every day, like Tomas, like you said. One of the things I've learned a lot from you, Tomas. One of the things I've learned today is I'm going to leave the Wall Street Journal out there on the front until I'm finished my Bible reading, because it sits right here and I'm reading my Bible. I look over and, I'm like, stocks went down, shoot.
Yeah.
And then the Bible goes over here and the Wall Street Journal comes. Now there's one last thing we're going to wrap up here, but, for our Halftime alumni, these webinars that Doug leads, these live streams are for three purposes: to keep connected with each other and to stay up on what is happening in our world. It's to continue. It's continuing ed. It's to continue to learn together how to build a great second half and how to finish well. But what I want you to know and see as you hear Tomas speak is that this is a global network of some of the most talented leaders in this world, and you have access to that network. There are experts in every single field. One of our Halftime alumni runs some of the most interesting issues of global finance in this world. He's a young leader, but he's brilliant, and he's right at the cusp of brand new innovations. And what Doug and I are hoping to do is to continue to bring to you some of the most fascinating alumni from around the world who can speak into what it looks like for you and I to finish well, to make 100x impact. I love that when Jesus said, don't be this kind of soil, don't be that kind of soil, but be the soil that could produce 30, 60, or 100-fold. And the question is, in your family, if that's a big part of your second half, doesn't matter if you're single or married, or you've got 12 siblings like my mom had, or you're a small family, what is it going to look like for you to take the next steps to become proficient at building robust, life-changing conversations where the news is not divisive, but it's the anvil on which your family's faith can be shaped?
Well, and I think Tom England has a nice comment there that sums up things. He suggests we need to triangulate our news sources. I've come to get my news from about 5 sources these days, and I'm open to more, even though I don't agree with all of them. And I think, Tomas, that's what you were suggesting.
Yeah.
Well, Tomas,
I think actually, can I say one thing on this one? I think that coming from a country when I grew up, which was extremely homogeneous, and having had this influx of people coming from all over the world because we naively stayed open, has created a new platform for us as Christians, where we as halftimers can play a new role, because so much is new, so much is out of our original context, and we just have to relearn. And relearning is harder than learning. And so we are right now in the process of building a new church, and no one has built a church like this for the last 50 or 70 years, because to handle the new demands, church has been growing, an old church that was on decline for decades. So new settings coming up because of the influx and because of what's going on in the globe, and we just got to relearn. And I think this is actually God's time. I think this way of that we are all a mixture of everything, and we're all gonna we're all created this way to become a flourishing community of people all around the earth. This is not a naive thinking now. I deeply believe in this picture of where we as Christians got to be able to handle this wherever we are.
Well, what a wonderful discussion.
Now, if you're listening from Europe somewhere, Tomas leads the halftime movement throughout Europe, and there are roundtables going that are virtual right now. He's beginning a new group, a global executive forum for senior executives that you might be interested in. And if you're in Europe and would love to connect with Tomas in the network, there are a ton of alumni over there in Europe already. We've been doing it for 15 years, right, Tomas? When you and I first did our tour around, we were in St. Petersburg and Warsaw last year. And it was wonderful to be with 15 CEOs in St. Petersburg, all Christian, all looking for how to use their platform to serve the Lord. If that's of interest to you, just click on Contact Lloyd and I'll connect you with the team there.
Well, great. We are going to wrap up now. We've been an hour into this. And Tomas, first of all, I wanted to thank you for taking so much time to set this up and have such a wonderful and dynamic and great amount of discord here and so insightful. Thank you so much, Tomas.
Well, thank you for everything you do for all of us.
Thanks, Tomas. Love you. And hi to Tina. And sorry we can't be together in Florida as normal in February, but COVID will pass soon, Lord willing.
Yeah.
And I want to thank our audience for spending so much time with us today. We really value your time, and we just appreciate you being here. And if you want to find out more, you can click on the link that Lloyd mentioned there in the center of the screen, maybe about over here. You can also find out more at halftime.org. That's HALFTIME.org. And the webinar is recorded. A link will be sent over to those that have registered, and it will soon be on a podcast, maybe in just a few weeks. So with that, we thank you so much, Lloyd, Tomas. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.